So I'd rather be here with you guys than listening to my 17-year-old try to explain me how to use Snapchat. Because some of the knowledge that we'll review today at a very high level is ancient knowledge that needs to be brought to the future. So we're going to talk about several premises. And again, this is going to be an overview, and we can get into a more granular level in the afternoon sessions. But we have the concept that our traditional physicians and scientists telling the public that they know more about the body than they actually do is destroying human health as we know it today, and is reducing our ability to rebalance our own biosystems using our own innate repair systems. That's premise one. That's called the arrogance premise. That's led to the subspecialization of medicine. It's led to categorical thinking. The more categories, the more distance from the whole. And the more you think that your small observation in one corner of one graphic has some conceptual linkage to the whole. And that's a flawed set of hypotheses, as we'll see in a minute. While this looks like a Intel circuit board, it's been produced in 2013 as a system biology of human aging, a network model of 2,200 pathways that are known intracellularly and how they're connected. So if you're dealing with this particular agent that I had the experience with here to here, this agent that had a specific target, an enzymatic target between these 2 points, the hypothesis of the company was that while we know what we're going to be able to do with this point being inhibited, and we don't expect to have any effect on the entire system. Well, as you recall from all the advertisements with all the medications, they spend about 35 out of the 60 seconds telling you about the adverse events, and that's because all of these are linked to other systems, and ultimately they have an effect on the whole system. And albeit most of the effects are occasionally positive, there are many, many adverse events, and these are unexpected and part of the mythology of what we are listening to towards the future. So this fundamental knowledge on human biology is very effective on the acute side, and we've heard this over and over again in the last 2 days, but it's fundamentally irrelevant for chronic disease because of these fragmented strategies, the limited biomarkers, the fact that polypharmacy does not work, and the complexity is exponentially increased. And that's a concept that I want to leave everyone with, that the complexity that we're dealing with is so fantastically larger than we thought that we have to be, as a group and as a society, cognizant of that in order to be heard by the public over the future. So the arrogance premise had led us to the current tolerance of our current health status. The promises of genomics are no longer imminent. It's now clear that that's not going to happen. The epidemic levels of all the chronic illnesses that we've heard about over the last few days are ubiquitous, and chemotherapy strategies for the largest killer, cancer, hasn't changed in the last 40 years. But this has been tolerated by the public for a number of reasons. And that's based on this medical mythology. But the second premise I wanted to talk about was the premise that we as a group of practitioners have understood these concepts for many decades, and we're best positioned to play a significant role in the future of medicine going forward, and that's because we have the respect and understanding for biological information. That's the premise that we function by. And what do we use? We use all these other tools. We use oxidative medicine, ozone, energy medicine, as we just heard the lecture preceding mine, and redox medicine, functional naturopathic biomic medicine, and then on the exercise, mind, and spirit, and dental medicine, all can affect the entire biosystem. Now, while FDA has a problem with a single therapy that can affect 20 different disorders because they can't wrap their arms around that because they've been schooled under the model of using a single target for a single disease, we have all these tools available to us. We have ozone, we have restore, we have ASEA, we have redox medicine, we have electrical medicine, we have vibrational medicine, and so on. While we have that, and we also have a fundamental respect for the extracellular matrix, meaning the matrix in which all cells live in. And so we now get a point where we're talking about the concepts of mitochondrial health and the concept of biocommunication, and enabling more mitochondrial health, enabling more biocommunication will help innate repair systems work on their own. While we have all that, we have to get to premise 3. So that's, we as a group need to be constantly aware of the level of complexity that we're dealing with and begin to codify our observations from using these therapies that affect the entire system. So if you're using ozone, if you're using PEMF, if you're using redox molecules, if you're using light, vibration, and so on, then you have a tool in which to explain a massively complex system. You can set yourself to show a myriad of different slides, which I'll show you in a moment, and wow the audience with the complexity, but nothing is more potent than a case history, a well-done case history. And collections of 200 case histories will be able to offset any amount of data that anyone else can produce in terms of a single targeted therapy. So the global therapy gives us a tool in which to communicate with the public and communicate with our colleagues in academics who are currently not listening to us. So what do I mean by complexity? Well, when I left Johns Hopkins in 1996, we created a chip that contained 500 chemokines and cytokines on it. So when you go to the most sophisticated laboratory that we have today commercially, you can, I think, measure about 12 cytokines. So if you really wanted to know what the effect of your therapy is, you can measure it in 500 cytokines and chemokines. We have interconnected cascades, which we've talked about in other lectures. We have 70 trillion cells bathed in a matrix. We have mitochondria and bacteria. And then I just wanted to mention something unique to me in my own background, and that is immunogenetics. I cut my teeth in the laboratory by showing why it is this rule of 20. So if we all took our coats off, 20% of us would be freezing cold in about 20 minutes. The 20% will be moderately cold, 20% will be neutral, 20% will be will be warm, and 20% will still be really hot. And that's more a function of stress hormones, thyroid and adrenal function. But the way we responded to altitude, that's our immunogenetics. That's our immune system interacting with our physiology and interacting with the fact that we're hypoxic. So we all bring this added level of complexity to the equation in terms of our immunogenetics, of course our genetics as well, and then we bring forward our epigenetics. So this is a very complex system, and yet 20 years ago we still had this talked about to the public. We know so much. We're winning the war on cancer. We have molecular biology. The public, you can relax. We'll develop drugs that cure your diseases, and we'll create guidelines called evidence-based medicine. And this has been a joke amongst us academics, because now this has become eminence-based medicine, not evidence-based medicine. That's because our chairmen of departments, which are funded by pharma, are now giving us our evidence-based guidelines, but they're eminence-based and flawed because of that. And that goes to speak to the why the majority of the population over the age of 60 are on statins. So 20 years ago, I don't want to overemphasize this middle part. You can read the rest. Pharma industry completed a 20-year shift from 40 years ago to 20 years ago in strategy from discovering drugs in whole animals to molecular targets. So that means I know enough about all disease, I know about hypertension enough, I know about diabetes enough that I'll be able to target it in a molecular petri dish approach and then do robotic screening against millions of compounds. So all the major pharma companies own millions of compounds, they screen them, and then when they get a hit, 5, 6 years later, after they optimize the results of the assay, they take it into an animal model, and then they find out whether the animals are dying or not on the whole system level, because they won't know 5 or 6 years into the development whether that's the case. And that has led to a reduced number of drugs being developed over the last 20 years than ever before. So why is this perpetuating? Because there's a new set of mythology that's been developed. So we have the present level of mythology for the least educated folks in the population, and that is, okay, listen, we know even more than we did 20 years ago. We don't really understand why we're failing, but we don't need to discuss that right now. We need to just use more advanced technology, and for the most part, the majority of the population likes this mythology. But for the more advanced folks, we'll say, no, we can get more personalized, we can get more high-tech, and here, we can use genomics, targeted therapies, tissue engineering, that's a big one, they like that. Digitization, they like that. System biology and nanotechnology, everyone likes those terms. But regenerative medicine and robotics are real, and they're currently being used and used successfully. But again, the mythology has grown into a more high-tech environment, and that will then cure, that is why you should continue the current strategy. But then I wanted to make you aware of a more advanced mythology that you may not be aware of. And humans are flawed technology. This is the mythology that we can give up on humans and we can become robotic ourselves. And this is a very interesting phenomenon, I think. So there are two major projects I want you to be aware of. One is called the Google Brain Project, headed by Ray Kurzweil, the genius who wants to live forever, and believes that despite being in the late 60s, that in his lifetime he'll be able to live forever. I'll explain why. And then by 2045, when I reach 93, there's a Russian group that wants to create avatars that will download our brains into bodies that are produced synthetically. This is a very important mythology because this will capture the younger population. And it says humans are flawed, we don't care about that, and nature is flawed. And where does it come from? It's because we're failing, and they don't want to take responsibility for that failure and say, listen, fundamentally, we're flawed, so let's evolve into a higher being. We don't care about our own innate systems because we don't know how to tap into it. So these are the brain nanobots by Ray Kurzweil. This is a neuronal element. This is this nanobot, which will then attach this person's neuron to the cloud. And this is going to happen by 2030, guaranteed, so on. This is the mythology. And if you read this to yourself, you'll realize that there's a religion being created about this. This seems like a religion. To me, it does, at least. And we'll become more godlike, because right now we're too fuzzy, we have brain fog. We don't feel as well as we should. We don't feel like God. We feel like, we're a mess, we're here, we're at high altitude, and the avatar won't mind the high altitude. And then the 2045 initiative is even more interesting, and that's the group of Russian scientists who have, by the way, collected 50,000 sign-ons with scientists and technologists around the world. 50,000 people believe that this will happen and are willing to help have it happen. And that is to create an artificial human body prototype so we could transfer our individual minds and consciousness into a body that will no longer decay. And they believe that this is possible. And then the point is to bypass and jump past disease and death. So here I am, I'm 93 years old. This is Herskowitz avatar. It's pretty nice, it's a pretty nice visual. I chose the generic version. Didn't want to look like Clooney. But I have a 25-year-old girlfriend, and we're both naked. It's fantastic. It's a fantastic visual, and one that will capture the imagination of most people. So we're going to skip nature because it's fundamentally flawed, and our failure as scientists and physicians are irrelevant. We just need a bypass strategy. And that's a very interesting psychological game that we're playing with the public. It's been going on for many decades, but now it's evolving to something that I find serious and interesting. So we need a more integrative system biology model where we're saying we want to understand the big picture. We're not going to skip over the human capability of repair. We're going to put pieces together, and we're going to induce our natural innate repair mechanisms. How are we going to do that? Well, when we talk to each other, it's interesting. We talk to each other in various forms, and it doesn't matter what the content shows, but this is the slide form. And you know, you read this slide, and everyone asks me, how does ozone work? How does ozone work? How does ozone work? So I show the slide. And no one really gets very much out of it because it's unappealing. It just doesn't sound sexy. It just has a fefew words in there. 2,3-DPG is exciting, HSP70 is exciting. But it doesn't quite make it, you know, it doesn't quite get you there. Oh, here's NFR2, that really gets everyone excited. NFR2 is tremendous, and all the different antioxidants are even more. It provides a visceral response. Now we know what we really know. Now we know something. Now this guy knows what he's talking about because he has these things on the slides. And then the arrow model is even better. So it activates NRF2, the antioxidant response elements, and that leads to a cascade of antioxidants. And oh, this is good because we understand why this stuff works, and now we can explain it to people, and then it goes on. And then with severe oxidative stress, oh, there's a new system. It's not NRF2, it's NF-kappa B, and oh, it's exciting, but it still leaves us a little bit dry. And then until we get to the cartoon phase, that's when we really get excited. The cartoon phase is truly exciting because you have the left side of the cartoon, which is anti-inflammatory. The right side of the cartoon is pro-inflammatory. And you have something that can elicit a little bit of both depending on how you use it. If you use it wisely or smartly or observe properly, you can always keep it on the left side. And that's really good. And it's even better when you add, oh, I have an epigenetic level to it. I can add the environment to it because we all know that plays the majority of the role of people's wellness or illness over time. So we have these slides, and now we say, oh, we really get it. Now we have a handle on this level of complexity, which involves an agent that is so fundamental, in this case ozone, is so fundamental that it could affect almost every disease on the planet. And yet, that's nonsense. That idea that you understand based on that cartoon what's going on is a tip of the iceberg effect, and it's something that makes you feel better, but won't hold any sense 5 years from now as we get deeper and deeper into it, because we're fundamentally still learning about all these effects. And ultimately, the most important thing is the observation of the effect, not the observation of the net effect of the therapy, not the individual pieces of the puzzle. Because this is really what the inflammatory cascade looks like in 2012. Everything above the midline is anti-inflammatory, everything below the midline is pro-inflammatory, and it begins to look the same. That's the inflammatory cascades. These are the stem cell cascades. These are repair cascades. These are tumor cascades. These are also repair cascades. And you notice this looks like a healing wheel because everything is connected to each other. It looks like the 5-element theories that I studied as an acupuncturist. But these are all interconnected. There are millions of cascades, of pathways that are all interconnected. If you think you understand them, then God bless you. But if you don't be embarrassed at all. Don't be embarrassed, because they all look like this. And if anyone understands that, then they'll win the Nobel Prize, but most of us can't fathom it, and we don't have to sit here and explain it. So when you look at my favorite thing, which is cardiovascular disease and pathology, I look at this nice slide, I say, oh, this is as simple as it gets. When I take a scanning electron micrograph and I say, let me look at the spaces in between the heart cells, because it looks empty. It's empty. There's nothing there. Well, that's not true. It's filled with fibrils, complex fibers and fibrils. And then when you go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, you get more and more and more. The empty space is not empty. It's filled. Just like the Hubble telescope looks at the empty space, it's not empty, it's filled. So complexity is normal, complexity is real, we have to deal with it, and the best way to deal with it is to describe the net effect of what we do, which works on a system level, on a patient. So I participated in a drug development program for heart disease, for advanced heart failure, spent $1.2 billion of someone else's money to do it. And notice something here. look at all these different categories of effect. This could just as well be PEMF, could just as well be ozone, could just as well be restore, could just as well be light, could just as well be anything. ASEA, it would be anything that works on a system level, because all of these effects, and this happened to be an adenosine regulating compound, which adenosine being the precursor for ATP, so it's an energy-based therapy. It failed in phase 3 trials, so we'll never hear about it. Just like last year when I spoke about UVBI, it failed in phase 3 trials, so we don't have it in our generic vocabulary. So we have the respect for extracellular matrix, which is highly complicated. We have a respect for communications networks, but what are we going to do with it? We have a respect for the interconnectivity that we all, basically all of our cells look like circuits, except we have 70 trillion of them, and the complexity is real. When I talk to patients, they say, okay, you've been trained in all these different areas, explain it to me. I say, no, I'm not going to explain it to you. I'm going to tell you that I respect the reality that the body is a very complicated orchestra, and if I'm fortunate enough that I have some therapies in my office that act as conductors, NRF2 activators, gamma interferon activators, activators of antioxidant systems, repletion of your depleted elements, amino acids, then you're fortunate enough in this universe for this stuff to work. So that the fact that we all have atonal people, atonal pieces of the orchestra all the time, that get hidden because the overall music is fine. But when 5 or 6 of them become atonal, then you come to me. But we have the ability to modify it because we have pieces of the conductor. And they understand that, and they respect that. Now, for those that don't like music, so we go to the car analogy. So you're the machine, you're the high performance of the machine. You haven't looked at your gauges as well as theoretically possible. We're going to start looking at your gauges intensively. So in yesterday's talk, David Minkoff gave the whole list of $3,000 to $4,000 worth of testing that can be done theoretically. So we do the best we can, but we look at the gauges, and then we understand that there's a wiring system, and the wiring system needs maintenance, and then they understand it. But we all have one wire out now, at least one. Some of us have 10, some of us don't know it. But the one that says, the person that says, I was fine until yesterday, and yesterday I woke up and I couldn't move, yeah, obviously things have taken longer times to develop, but the concept that the wiring needs maintenance too. Now, how do I fix this wire? I have no idea how to fix it. I have no idea how to fix it. But maybe there's some super oil that can fix it. So I don't know how it works. I'll just do it. And then when it works, then I can describe it to other people. When I can get a collective description of it, then I'll be in much more position to be to be listened to. So we use everything. We use everything on this slide. But what we don't do is observe. We observe and we test, but we don't document, we don't retest, and we don't redocument. So unless we all visit the booth next to ASEA, Restore, and this thing called Spark, this enterprise that may be able to collectively put us together to document our results. Documentation from someone who's published many papers. Documentation a la academic medicine is oversold. It makes careers, but doesn't convince anyone anything. 1 in 7 definitive papers from the New England Journal of Medicine get negated. The algorithm, the mathematical models show that 50% of all placebo-controlled trials are proved to be false later. So that's good for academic careers, but not very good to teach the public anything. Storytelling, but documented storytelling that's real, that's in my opinion the way to go. Because in 10 years, pharma will take over this field. And they'll call things different names. These are the names that they'll call it. So ozone, I don't know what they'll call it. They'll call it mitochondrial something. But they'll take over the field. And they'll take over it with a new mythology and a new economic purpose and new economic sets of goals, but patients won't be any better off for it. So unless we take the pulpit, we'll still remain in this corner. Because when you see it's only taken 15 years for geneticists to move to being covered by groupies in the front of the line to being relegated to the corner. And epigeneticists now coming to the front. It only took 15 years. So 15 years from now is a good vision to have us taking forward our own philosophies based on real cases. So the whole system is the future, not system-based, and whether we become roboticized or not remains to be seen. But we'll use our new tools, and we'll do so, more importantly, in the center. We're open with humility to linking the small with the infinite, and don't pretend to know everything. And with that, we can achieve extraordinary results. Because there are no specialities in medicine. This was determined 120 years ago, and we just have to be familiar. And more importantly, the young physician starts life with 20 drugs for each disease, but the older physician ends life with one drug for 20 diseases. Thank you very much.